Thank you all for coming. Great to see so many people here, both again alumni and present people and faculty and staff and community members and family. So I'm thrilled to have Chris Frauenhofer back with us virtually giving the seminar this week. Chris graduated in 2013 and then got a master's degree. And you'll have to remind me, I'm sorry, I don't have the sheet in front of me, from
Antioch University.
Antioch, okay, yeah. And has been working in Utah for a few years as a wildlife biologist, I guess, or conservation biologist. And he's gonna, so just again, as usual, we will, at the end, we'll have questions first from anybody that's in room lecture hall, and then we'll open it up to questions in from cyberspace. So I'm gonna turn it over to Chris.
Right. Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for inviting me to do this. It's great to be able to give presentations far away where I normally probably wouldn't be able to come all the way to Alfred. So I really appreciate it. And as Michelle said, so I work as the wildlife biologist for the Utah National Guard out in Utah. And I've been doing that for, this is my 4th summer doing that. And it's been really interesting, I think. I don't know about a lot of you, but I guess when I was in college and certainly even into grad school and that, I didn't realize quite how much the military actually does with conservation and natural resource management stuff. So it's been certainly a learning experience for me, and I'm excited to share a little bit about it. So hopefully, if nothing else, by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding of why the military has wildlife biologists and natural resource managers, and then what we do, why it's important, hopefully. So I'll give you a quick outline. So I'll just kind of go over the land ownership in Utah. It's kind of interesting. And then how much of that land is military lands. We'll go kind of talk about relevant legislation. It's boring, I'll go through it quickly, but without it, I wouldn't have a job and wouldn't probably be given this talk. And then I'll talk about the specific Utah Guard properties that we manage. And then I'll talk about some of the projects that I think are particularly interesting. So here's kind of a map of Utah as a whole, and the map on the left just shows land ownership, and basically everything that's not this kind of off-white yellow it is on my screen is public land, except for the orange is Indian reservation, so that's not technically public land. But all the rest of this, the green, the yellow, that pinkish, is all public land. So Utah actually is the 2nd highest percent of public land of any states, and the first one is actually Nevada with 81% public land. Utah has 66.5% of total land being public, and then the 3rd is Alaska, 61%. The public lands in Utah, they make up, as you can see, about, I guess, 3/4 of the state. And 3.3% of that land is administered by the DoD, which is the Department of Defense. And that accounts for 1.8 million acres. And that is this pinkish stuff. So there's a big property here, this one north of that, and then there's a few properties right here, and those are the biggest ones. This big one here is the Dugway Proving Ground, which you may or may not have heard of. And then I'll mostly talk about, this is Camp Williams, which I'll talk about later, but that's the Utah National Guard property that I spend most of my time on. And then this map on the right shows just the Utah National Guard properties. So Dugway Proving Ground and is what we call Big Army. And then these properties on this map on the right are all the Utah National Guard properties. A lot of them are just small armories that they have around the state where they store, a unit and some vehicles. But then some of these dots, like that one, Camp Williams, is about right here on the border of Utah and Salt Lake County. And then I'll talk a little bit about, there's a few what we call local training areas around the state that we do projects on. So I'll talk about those places now. So these are the three biggest resource properties that we manage, Camp Williams being the biggest one. As I said, at 25,000 acres. We have a small property down in St. George that's only 65 acres, and that's interesting. I'll talk about that a little later. And then we have these LTAs, which are these dots across the state for units to go out and train on, so they don't have to come all the way up to Camp Williams in Salt Lake. And those areas are about 15,000 acres, or yeah, 1,500, sorry, acres. So why, I guess, are the properties, the military land important as far as conservation goes? Well, the Forest Service and the DoD have the highest number of Endangered Species Act status species of all the federal agencies. But the DoD manages far less land than the Forest Service. So military lands have 3 times higher density of ESA status and imperiled species than even the lands of the National Park Service. So we have a very disproportionate amount of, say, of listed endangered species compared to the amount of land that we own, or manage, I should say. So for that reason, the military plays a huge role in managing and preserving biodiversity across the US. And so because it's managed by the federal government, it's not public lands per se, I would say, but there are some military lands that allow public recreation actually, and even hunting and hiking and stuff like that. But we have to adhere to these laws. And the most important one for my job in particular is something called the Sykes Act, which was, I think, 1960 was when the law was originally enacted. And it basically outlines a framework that every single DoD property, Department of Defense property, has to have a integrated natural resource management plan to basically preserve training lands into the future, so that we don't, the idea behind it is that we don't just slash and burn and, what am I trying to say here? Essentially, we need land for training maneuvers, and we don't want to use it up too quickly. So the in-ramps are prepared with cooperation of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the state Fish and Wildlife agencies. So those integrated natural resource management plans have to be signed off by those 2 agencies, and they're required at about 380 military installations, 380 military installations that we have across the country. So then these other laws, the Endangered Species Act, you're probably somewhat familiar with, but because it's federal land, we have to abide by that law. The National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, a lot of the projects that we do, we have to do what we call do NEPA on, and so it's either an EA, or if we have an existing EA, then we have to do what's called a REC, a Record of Environmental Consideration, nested under that EA to do almost anything, including the wildlife surveys and projects that I do. There's the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which has obviously been a hot topic lately, but to give the military a lot of credit, despite all the confusion and the letter from the solicitor that said that incidental take is no longer covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Well, the military said, just stay the course. That's not, it hasn't been turned into law yet or anything. We're going to keep enforcing incidental take, and that's how we've been operating since the new administration. So I think that's been really good by them. And then the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, which gives specific protections to bald and golden eagles. We do have golden eagles on a few of our properties, and they're actually not listed under the Endangered Species Act, but because of this this act, we do a significant amount of management and conservation with golden eagles. So these are all the legal reasons why biologists and natural resource managers exist on military lands. So I'll go in and start talking about some of the properties that we have and that we manage species on. So I said the St. George Armory property, which is located in the southwestern corner of the state, is kind of interesting because it's only 65 acres, so relatively small, as you can probably see from the map there, but it has 2 endangered plant species on it and one state species of greatest conservation need. Comparatively, on Camp Williams, that large property, the 25,000 acre property, we have 0 federally endangered species. So this one's, like I said, kind of fun. We go down there every spring and do monitoring. So those 3 species are this dwarf bear claw poppy, the Holmgren's milk vetch, and the western banded gecko. The dwarf bear claw poppy just grows on these gypsum-rich soils that only exist in that part of the state, and I believe a little bit of Nevada and Arizona as well. But we actually go down there and count every single plant every year because there's that few of them. And then this Holmgren's milk vetch we just found recently in the past, I think 3 years ago was the first time we observed it. And it's a strange plant that kind of shows up one year and then it'll be absent or dormant for a few years and then it comes back. So we're currently working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to come up with a management plan and figure out how to deal with that, really. And then the third species, this western banded gecko, is just, it doesn't have any federal protection, but it's a state species of concern. So we do manage for that. I go down and do surveys. We just kind of like we put cover boards out and count them and just prescribe some habitat enhancements, such as preserving the vegetation that they like. So also down in St. George, this is an interesting project that's loosely related, but back in the 1960s or early 1970s, there was a unit in the National Guard that was stationed down at the Armory, and they had a bunch of leftover ammo. So they went up and basically shot rocket launchers into a hillside in this area in red here. And there was no developments that far north at the time, no one around, so they didn't think anything of it. Fast forward to now, about in the last 10 years, they've started some heavy development up there in residential neighborhoods, and a civilian was walking out around that area and found what we call UXOs, which are unexploded ordnance. So basically a bomb or some kind of ammunition that may or may not have detonated. Obviously a public safety concern. So the military has a property, it's called MMRP, the munitions, I'm blanking on this acronym. Anyway, we spend a bunch of money to go down and clean it up. Well, this property, since the 70s, has become critical habitat for the desert tortoise. This big green outline is actually the Red Cliffs, or is it? Yeah, the red outline is the Red Cliffs Desert Preserve, which was created in the 90s specifically to protect desert tortoise. And then, as you can see, this property is right kind of on the border in the middle of it. So we had to do what's called a biological assessment for desert tortoises before they could go out and do any work, because they essentially had to clear vegetation with a tractor and then use a remote sensing basically a little cart that they drive over to look for these unexploded ordnances within the top layer of surface soil. And that cart has the potential to crush and run over desert tortoises. We actually just finished that. It started in 2018 and it's just finishing up now. We had to do clearance surveys and then fence the whole area to keep the desert tortoises out as part of the plan with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then now we go back every year and we do some vegetation monitoring to make sure that the vegetation is growing back the way that we anticipate, and it will continue to be suitable habitat for tortoises into the future. So that's kind of a sidebar. We don't own that property, but I think it's a pretty interesting project. So, and then this is our third property I told you about. This is the big one, Camp Williams, the 25,000 acre property. And for the rest of the presentation, I'll kind of focus on this because this is where I spend almost all my time and where we do, probably 99% of our projects in management. So Camp Williams is a high quality kind of habitat area that's in the middle of a developing area. So you've got the Salt Lake Valley, Salt Lake City to the north, and then down in Utah County, you've got Provo to the south. And basically, Provo has been expanding north and Salt Lake City has been expanding south, and it's just filling up the valley. And Camp Williams has kind of been left as this island of quality habitat, whether the military likes it or not. And then also to confound that, the Camp Williams has increased its training load in the past 10 years, and probably even a little bit previous to that, because it has such a similar climate, terrain, and vegetation to the Middle East, where, as you probably know, most of our conflicts are currently taking place. So for those two reasons, the Army actually has what's called an ACUB program, which is the Army Compatible Use Buffer program. And we have been trying to buy up land around Camp Williams to increase, to basically make a buffer. Because as you could imagine, firing artillery and gun ranges and that are not what people probably want in their backyards. So that's agriculture, conservation easements, and properties that the Army deems compatible with training scenarios. So it's been morphed into what is now called the Western Traverse Sentinel Landscape, and there's a large grant associated through the NRCS that the Army matches to try and buy up all these lands. That's been, I think, really crucial in actually maintaining and conserving a lot of the wildlife in the area. It's a huge deer migration corridor for mule deer, American pronghorns, American antelope, and then it's also important because Camp Williams is in the middle of what are called the Traverse Mountains, which connects the Wasatch, which are the mountains to the east, to the Ochre Mountains, which are to the west. And it's Camp Williams is a east-west running range that connects the two. So it's a really the takeaway is it's a really critical and important wildlife habitat area. And as you can see, these are all pictures, species that from Camp Williams, and I'll probably talk a little bit about each of them for different projects. We have a huge population of cougars, actually, even though we're so close to urban habitat. And Camp Williams has the longest running mountain lion study in Utah. We also, because it's such a habitat, we have a lot of interesting surveys and projects going on. The dogs are going crazy out there. So we have a really long-term bird monitoring data set that goes back, started in 1993. And it's been interesting to see how that's changed over the years. We do pollinator surveys and habitat enhancement. In the recent years, that's become obviously something of concern. The monarch butterfly is now a candidate species for listing under the Endangered Species Act. So we do a lot of surveys and management for them. The listing decision is supposed to come out in December. So that could mean a lot of changes for the way we do things if that ends up getting listed. And then we do a lot of habitat management for these species. Our three kind of major habitat types are these sagebrush, seas. We have some oak shrub, gamble oak shrub, chaparral kind of habitat. And then we have Pinion juniper forest. Those are the three big ones. And then we have a small amount of riparian habitat, so wetlands and then wetland dependent vegetation. And we do some enhancement and restoration on those. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these things in a little bit. So before I go into those, here are some of the quirks, as I mentioned in the title, of working on a military base. And you've probably heard me by now mention all these acronyms, and I've tried to make sure that I actually say what they are, but having worked there for 4 years now, I don't even know all of them, but I have noticed that I start to speak in them, even when I'm around people who don't necessarily know what they are. And so that is definitely something that I found interesting and had to learn a bit about. You can imagine that working around live fire ranges and military training probably has its quirks. So we have, every time we go out into the field, I have to take a radio with me, and we have range control whose job is to basically keep everybody safe. And you get in contact with them and say, I want to go work here today. And they'll say yes or no. So there's a great deal of flexibility I have to deal with to get the work done, because sometimes I want to go to a certain area and I can't because they're, either shooting guns or blowing stuff up in that area. And as you can imagine, with that comes the possibility of, so after they complete their trainings, there are what's called unexploded ordnances, or UXOs as they call them. And these are anything that didn't explode or that as it was supposed to. And so when you're walking around out there, every now and then you'll stumble across something big and scary, and you don't touch it. We take a GPS point and kind of report it to them, and they do go out and take care of it. They have a bomb squad essentially that'll blow these things up. But as soon as you see one of these things, I basically just turn around and walk away. So yeah, some interesting things that are not so wildlife related, but we deal with. Oh, and these helicopters, they do a fair bit of flying around, and I feel like they like to see our little work vehicles out there, and they use them as I don't know, targets to buzz. So they'll fly really close overhead and scare the crap out of us. So that's always fun. So another interesting part that goes along with the military bases. So it is a lot of vast habitat, but they have a lot of equipment and storage out on the range, as they call it, out in the middle of the desert, and the birds especially like to use it. So these are both two pictures of great horned owl chicks. This picture, they nested up here in the rafters, but then as they're starting to fledge, you can see they really like to perch on, these are crates of artillery ammunition. And so every now and then I'll get called to move them off of those essentially. they like to hang out on the equipment here too. And then we have Great Basin rattlesnakes. It's our only species of venomous reptile. There's a few other military installations that have 3-4 different species. We just have the one, but on a decent amount, I get called to move rattlesnakes out of the latrines or the range buildings. I don't know, the military personnel just don't like them as much as I do. When we do that, I usually, so we pit tag them, and I give a little spiel about how, they are important. They control rodent populations, and we do have, hennavirus, which is a rodent-borne disease that is not so good for humans, but these guys do a great job of eating a lot of our rodents. So they are important, and it's nice to move them instead of what the military would sometimes do otherwise, which is just kill them. So now I'll talk more about kind of the specific projects and conservation that we do on the base. And I mentioned earlier that we do a fair amount of wetland and riparian restoration. The water in the West is everything. There's very little of it. On Camp Williams, about 3% of our land cover is wetland or riparian habitat. But almost every species that we have on the installation has been observed on a wildlife camera or or tracked using these sources. So they're very disproportionately important. And unfortunately, over the past few years to the last decade, there's been a lot of mismanagement of this habitat, a lot of cattle grazing. We use cattle to manage fire fuels and to decrease the risk of fire. And they're supposed to stay in these paddocks that are developed, but they escape. And of course, if you're a large mammal in the middle of the desert, the first place you're going to go is to find water. So they end up hanging around these wetland spring areas, and they just create a lot of damage because there's a lot of them. And unlike our native wildlife like mule deer and the pronghorns, they just sit on them because they don't, I guess they're not as afraid of predators or that. So we got a project going through what's called the Watershed Restoration Initiative, which is run by the Utah Department of Natural Resources. We secured a grant to fence a lot of our wetlands to keep those cattle out. And then we went in and we do this process-based restoration, PBR, as we've been calling it, with the help of an organization called Wild Utah Project. And basically we go in with some volunteers and staff from DWR, and we build what we call BDAs, or beaver dam analogs. And the purpose of these are to raise the water table back up, which as you might be able to see from this picture, they get incised, which is this deepening of the water channel and discontinuity from what would be the floodplain. And these BDAs are mimicking actual beaver activity that have been extirpated from a lot of these places in the West. And they will slowly, over time, catch sediment and raise the water table back up. We may never be able to reconnect it to its old floodplain, which in this picture would probably be up here, but we can at least stop it from getting down cut and becoming what some people call, get a new feature on the landscape. Give it a name, it becomes a canyon instead of a spring. So this has been really cool, and we just started this actually last year, and I'm really happy. So these pictures, both these pictures on the left are the wetlands when the cattle was getting in, and you can see all those little holes are their footprints, and they create this trail along the edge. There's the wetland, and then there's no riparian vegetation. There should be willow and other plants here. So it looks pretty bad. And in just this 1 year, this is the same spot, these two pictures. Just by putting up that fence and keeping the cattle out and putting in these simple structures, visually you can see that it's rebounded pretty well. And we've actually, these are some willow stakes, these right here, just live cuttings that we put in the ground, and I'm happy that they've taken off as well as they have. So I think we're well on our way to some good restoration of these important habitats. And I mentioned earlier, monarch butterfly is a candidate species for listing. So another way we get a decent amount of our funding is this is where we have breeding monarch populations as the milkweed tends to grow along the sides of these riparian areas. Milkweed is really important for reproduction. Monarchs will only lay their eggs on milkweed plants. And so we'll continue to plant more milkweed in this area as well. And this will be really great for, hopefully, monarch conservation. And we do that through another group called, there's this integrated monarch monitoring program, which is at the nationwide level that we contribute our data to. That's administered by the Monarch Joint Venture, and they've been really great to work with. So moving on to another project. So we have a decent amount of raptors that nest out here. The West is great habitat. So Mike mentioned before, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act are the two laws that basically guide all our work here. But we haven't had a pair of nesting golden eagles since 2017, but we have some cameras we put on the nests that are connected to the cellular network. And I get a picture every day of how our eagle nests look in the spring. And that way we know, basically as soon as they're active. And under the Protection Act, we have to put buffers around them so that no training, takes place too close, and that we don't accidentally disturb a nest and cause it to fail. Same thing with, we monitor look for and monitor all the raptor nests on the base under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. This is a nest of long-eared owl chicks that we found this spring. We found 34 active nests on the 34 nests. I think maybe 20 or so were active this year on the base. And we monitor them every year, take data on what the fledgling success rate is, and we actually contribute all that data to a statewide raptor nesting database that's recently just developed and is really cool. And then this is a northern harrier that visited one of those springs I was talking about in the earlier slide. As part of that same, we have a ton of kestrels out here, and there's an organization in Salt Lake called Hawkwatch International, and we participate in their kestrel partnership. So we'll put up nesting boxes around camp, and that the kestrels nest in those as opposed to nesting in the buildings, because kestrels don't build actual nests. They just nest in the cavity. So like a roof of a building sometimes, or in these cases, we build them little houses, and then they come out and we band the chicks, and they're doing a large citizen science project to see how where the chicks are dispersing to. We don't have a whole lot of data on that yet, but hopefully in the next coming years, we'll start to see where some of our kestrel chicks are ending up. So then I mentioned earlier, we have Great Basin rattlesnakes. So in the last year, I've started a project where we're tracking Great Basin rattlesnakes to see, for multiple reasons, but the idea is that they den up in hundreds of individuals, sometimes multiple species. So you'll get rattlesnakes with other species of snakes like racers and whip snakes, and they all converge in these dens, which are usually rocky areas in the spring and the fall. And obviously the military does not want to be training next to them, nor do they want to, build structures or that very close that then are going to end up attracting rodents and then attracting a ton of rattlesnakes. So we started this project. The goals are to identify these high use areas, find the dens, and then I'm interested in kind of estimating home ranges, comparing the males and the females. I have a feeling that they move different amounts, and then yeah, looking at what kind of habitat they're using on the base. So the way we do that. Up here in the left corner, this is a radio, VHF radio transmitter. We take that and we surgically implant it into a rattlesnake. Transmitter goes back here, and then we run the antenna along up towards the head. And then we go out with this kind of antiquated receiver and follow the blips to where they are. We track them about 2 to 3 times a week. To see, like I said, what they're using, and hopefully, I've been tracking this fall, they're going to lead us to their dens, and we'll know where those are, and we can properly conserve those. And then, so I have a little bit of preliminary data. We just started this this spring, so I transmitted 24 rattlesnakes, which is a decent amount, but because we have a good network of roads, it hasn't been too bad tracking them. As you can see, so each different color is a different rattlesnake, and the lines connect, are their movement patterns. They all kind of have been exhibiting, these different kind of movements. This is a zoom into, so I'll zoom into this area right here, and this is, so now I know that this is a den area. They've all kind of converged right here. And turns out, I haven't done any analysis yet, we'll do some kernel density estimation and that to see what their home ranges are for 1 year. But so this little purple one, this little red one, and then this blue one are females. And then all these other ones are males. So if I had to say from 1 year, I'd say that there is a definite difference between the home ranges of the males and the females. But the plan is to keep doing this for the next into the future, hopefully in the next 6 years maybe. You can put, the transmitters last for 2 years, and you can do up to 3 surgeries in 1 snake. So we could theoretically get 6 years of data out of the snakes, which would tell us a lot about where they move and what they're doing. Another interesting note is they don't seem to cross into this agricultural land, where I know some like timber rattlers back east and that will use agricultural lands. I guess out here maybe it's just too hot and dry. Again, it's just 1 or 2 snakes, so it's hard to say for sure, but it'll be interesting in the future to see if they keep exhibiting that pattern. And we collaborate with Dugway Proving Ground is also doing some of this work, and then biologists out at Great Basin National Park. So we should have data on snakes from a few different habitats and places. So I'm really excited about this. I think it's going to be really interesting. And did we find a den? We'll see if this works, but if you're squeamish of snakes, you might want to look away. But this is a pile of rattlesnakes. This is one of the dens we found. And this den we found because two of the snakes that we transmitted, have denned up here already this year. There's still a few that are still out and about, so it'll be interesting to see where they go. But yeah. And then the last project I'll talk about, and this one we're just getting started as well. So Pinion Jays are a species of concern. They've been rapidly declining from 1967 to 2015. They've documented an 83% decline in population in North America, and it's predicted to decrease by another 50% in the next 20 years. So because of this, the it's a priority species for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the military has a organization called the DoD Partners in Flight, and they create a list of mission essential species, and basically the Pinion Jay is one of 16 mission critical species, as if they do get listed, they could impact, could have some serious impacts on the military mission and what we can do. So we just got some funding this year to do some research on them. There's not a whole lot known, there's some work down in New Mexico, but we're kind of at the northern range of the Pinion Jay and Pinion Pine for that matter. So we don't have a whole lot of data on where or how or what they're doing. So we did a pilot project this fall. I went out and we constructed these Pinion Jay monitoring stations, which is basically a giant bird feeder attached to a car battery to draw them in. And it plays a broadcast call, Pinion Jay call as well, to try and draw the Pinion Jays in so that we can, and there's a wildlife camera next to it to capture them and see if we can draw them in. I know we have observations of them through those breeding bird surveys in the past 20 years that they do occur, but we don't have a good idea where. So if we can get them to come to these stations, we'll put out basically a pigeon trap, a walk-in pigeon trap, and then we will affix some GPS transmitters, which are kind of like the snake transmitters, but we'll just, they won't be surgically implanted. We put them on the outside, and they will you won't have to go out and find them. They'll have a GPS, an automated GPS location in them, and then we can actually find out where they are, what habitat they're using at what times of year. Are they wintering on Camp Williams? Are they foraging? What kind of other important information so that we can say with any sort of confidence that the military training will or will not affect their life histories. And so another interesting thing, Utah as a whole has been managing pinyon juniper woodlands by basically chaining out or removing hundreds of acres to manage for sage grouse. And now we're kind of wondering, well, how is that affecting pinion jays that actually use the habitat? So we'll be doing some Pinion juniper woodland management in the future. So if we can get some transmitters on the jays, it'll be interesting to see how they react or use that that habitat. So anyway, and we haven't found any pinion jays yet, but here's a saw-whet owl that seems to like perching on the feeder. And with that, I will wrap it up. I think I went a little bit over. I apologize.
No, you're good. I've got 5 after. So I'm going to open it up for, by the way, that was fantastic. Except for the snake stuff. I think I'll leave that up to you. I'll open it up to Fred to see if there's any questions in the lecture hall.
So I had one question. So in terms of like the projects that you do, you said the Pinion Jays was one that the DoD had marked as important, but do you have kind of some of your own range, like the rattlesnakes? Seems like a project that you were more invested in than maybe the military in some aspects. So is it a lot of military decisions as to what projects you work on, or do you have some of your own free kind of range to work on some of the stuff that you wanted to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a little of both. You're right. I mean, I focus on the rattlesnakes because I think it's interesting. I am invested and I like it. But I get the funding for that based on the fact that the military is interested in where these dens are and avoiding them. The projects are all developed around an aspect that is important to the military mission or training. A lot of the time that is like the Pinion Jay stuff, or like with the monarch butterfly, knowing where the habitat is and where they're breeding and stuff, so that we can minimize training effects to them, and we have to under the Endangered Species Act. but then, yeah, the rattlesnake one is unique because they're not an endangered species, obviously, or even close to being one. They're just, you know, because they're venomous and they pose a human health concern in a way. They're interested in knowing that stuff. And then, like the home range stuff is just we're collecting the data anyway. We have some freedom to look at that kind of stuff as well.
Any other questions from the lecturer?
No, I think we're good. Thanks, Chris. There you go. There's some folks in the chat I think have questions.
Yeah. So Bill has a question.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I saw that you used GIS a lot in this presentation. Were those maps something that you created, or do you have somebody in your team that is specifically focused in GIS? Because I find the program really interesting and plan to look into it further for grad school and careers. So I didn't know if it was something that they expect of you, or if that's a specific job position within your team.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I make all of these maps, but also the same way because I was really interested in it, and I felt like I couldn't. It's hard to explain to someone else sometimes. You know, so I'll back up a bit. We do have a specific GIS person in the Utah National Guard in what is called Environmental Resources Management. And their job is to, you know, we have tons of GIS data, you know, these roads, they do a lot of stuff. So I just do the wildlife stuff. There's people in our department that are doing like EPA stuff, spills and cleanups and all that kind of stuff. And there's GIS data associated with that. So there's someone in our department that manages all that data. And part of their job is to create maps for other people that are not, you know, well-versed in GIS. That being said, I feel like in the wildlife field, it's a little bit more, there's more that you can do than just the making maps. And like I said, analyzing, you know, these snakes for home ranges and stuff like that is a little bit more specific. And so I do a lot of that stuff just because our GIS person isn't so familiar with those specific analysis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you very much. It is something that is hard to describe. Whenever I talk to, like I was talking to my grandparents about it, and to get their minds wrapped around it, I referenced election results by state. So you know how on the news they'll have a map of different state colors? That's the example I go to when I got to explain GIS to somebody.
Right. Yeah. And it's a super useful, it's a super useful tool. I definitely think everyone should have some kind of background in it.
I agree. Thank you very much. These are beautiful maps.
Thanks.
Maya had a question. You there, Maya? Can you unmute? Let's see, ask to unmute. Let's see.
Let me see if I can find them.
Okay, Maya, you still there?
Yeah. Hi, sorry about that.
Okay. That's all right. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't a very serious question, but watching that video got me wondering if you or anyone else in your group had gotten bitten by those rattlesnakes.
So no, I have never been bitten. I never intend to get bitten. I actually only know one person. And it's actually it is a biologist that I work with. Basically, it should have been avoided. So when we go to this, so that video was taken with a camera inside a pair of snake tongs. So like, you know, I was probably 6 feet away from that den taking the video, and we wear you know, snake all the proper safety equipment. We have snake leg guards and all that when we're going out and tracking. So it's really actually very safe. And I think the record in Utah, it's like less than 100 people have ever been bitten, I want to say. Only two or three have been fatal, and they're males between the age of 15 and 28, and alcohol is usually involved. So it's, yeah, they're not as dangerous as I think people, they're misunderstood, in my opinion.
Other questions? You can either let me know in the chat or unmute yourself or whatever. All right, so I'll ask a question. Do you work for the federal government then?
No, I am actually a state employee.
Okay.
So it's interesting with the Guard, the Utah National Guard being a state entity. We get our funding from the federal government, but then it gets switched over to the state, and then somebody else who has a degree in financial stuff deals with it from there. But it's, yeah, I'm actually a state employee, which is nice.
Okay, Marion Weaver has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Marion?
Yeah, you mentioned, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you've got a connecting mountain range between the eastern ones and the western ones, which I presume run north-south-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So is it the Uintas that are east-west? And
oh, go ahead.
And how did that happen?
So the Uintas are actually, so if you can see these maps, I'll kind of point out here. So this is the Uinta range up here, which is an east-west running mountain range. And I think you're right, other than the Brooks Range, it's like the biggest east-west running mountain range in the US. So Camp Williams is right here. And so this is the Oquirrh Mountain Range that runs north and south. And these are the Wasatch Mountains right here. And then where Camp Williams is they're called the Traverse Mountains, which is just a very small mountain range that connects those two down here. So we're actually a decent ways away from the Uinta Mountains.
And are the traverses, it's so unusual that they would be east-west in that region of the country. And I know it's not your field, but do either you or Michelle know what would cause them to have been uplifted there?
So, and I let Michelle talk about it too. What I believe and what I've been told is, so when the Great Salt Lake was bigger, or there used to be a big ancient Lake Bonneville that used to be here.
Right, right.
When the Salt Lake was bigger, this, and it connected to, this I think was a southern shoreline or boundary, and it, at some point, I don't know if it blew out, but it was a barrier. I don't know how it originally lifted though. Maybe Michelle knows.
What was the name of it again? That range?
The Traverse Mountains.
Traverse, okay. I want to write that down. I'll look it up.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that, I'm afraid. Sorry.
That's a very good talk. Thank you. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you.
Other questions for Chris? Okay, well, in that case, we can virtually have some clapping here. That was incredible. I mean, you must just absolutely love your job, Chris.
I do. I'm very fortunate, and it's, yeah, I love living out here in Utah, and I never thought in a million years I'd actually be working for the military, to be honest with you, but it's one of those things that's worked out really well.
Yeah, it seems like a great position for you. So thank you very much. And for the rest of you, see you next week at seminar. And I honestly can't remember, and I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I'm sure it'll be good, whoever it is next week.